Thanks for joining us. Thanks for being on time. We're going to get started, even though some people are still, I see, connecting, and I'm sure they will connect. But I want to respect everybody's time. And thank you again. I'm excited about this conversation we're about to have. I'm passionate about everything business, but in particular, franchises is a hot topic. It's a topic I chat about a lot on my podcast show, The How of Business. And I recently, in the last few months or so, have developed a relationship with Giuseppe. I'll let him introduce himself in a moment. And now we have a marketing partnership together because he's my trusted partner now for everything franchising. In other words, if you need a franchise consultant, and we'll explain why you do, he's my guy. He's the guy I trust and that I recommend for my clients. So this is the Franchise Freedom Workshop. We're going to, in an hour or so, and we're going to try our best to stick to that hour. We're going to chat about all of this, but let's do some formal introductions. I think most of you probably found out about this workshop through my podcast or other sources related to myself. But again, I'm Henry Lopez. I am an entrepreneur. I am a business owner currently. In fact, one of my businesses that I'm a minority partner in is a franchise. And my very first business back in 1991 was a franchise. So I have a lot of experience, I think, with franchises. I've had clients, of course, who have considered and owned franchises. So I'll share my knowledge based on my actual experiences. And of course, I'm the host of the How of Business podcast. Giuseppe, please welcome and introduce yourself, if you would, please.
Thanks, Henry. I appreciate it. So Giuseppe Grammatico, that's a mouthful. We shortened it to GG, the franchise guide. It was very difficult to spell, but appreciate you having me on and welcome everyone. Looking forward to meeting you and answering questions. I'm an entrepreneur. I've owned both franchise and non-franchise businesses. I'm also a podcast host of the Franchise Freedom Podcast. Henry was on the show not too long ago. I was on his. It was a great time. Had some great questions. I'm also author of the Franchise Freedom Podcast. If you notice a trend there, we kept everything franchise freedom. It's a manifesto that we wrote during the pandemic last year, which talks about kind of laying out a roadmap to owning a franchise. And again, my website is GG, the franchise guide, where you can gather a lot of information and a great way to connect with me.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Giuseppe. This is going to be a lot of great information shared. All of you should have received an email. I thought I was going to be able to upload it here, but if anybody did not get the worksheet that I sent earlier this evening or late this afternoon, let me know. I'll get it to you, but I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to print that out. I really want this to be as much of a workshop as possible. I want it to be as interactive as this platform allows it to be. I'm going to be monitoring for questions as Giuseppe does the bulk of the presentation. So as I mentioned before, there's that chat button. Find it now and maybe even just say hello there so that you know how to use it. Ask questions. If I think it's appropriate to intervene and answer it as we're going through it, I will. Otherwise, we will get to all of your questions at the end. Make this hour that we're spending together worthwhile. Yeah, let's make it interactive. I want you to get value out of it. The worksheet I think will help you with that. And so I'm going to refer back to the worksheet. You don't have to do it, but I'm going to refer to it as we go through this content with the idea that at the end, at least you've got the beginnings of some more crystallized thoughts, especially as we talk about criteria and how to go about picking your own franchise. That's the idea behind it. So have it in front of you if you'd like to, and follow along as I point you to different parts of it. What we're going to cover today is we're going to talk about very briefly what is a franchise. I know you all understand at the high level what it is, but let's just level set on that and explain that. So we'll spend a few minutes on that. Then why should you consider a franchise? And as we get into this section, we'll begin to help you define why a franchise for you. And that's the important takeaway here. And so finding your franchise, then we'll get into more of the at least beginning to identify your criteria. And then ideally you work with someone like Giuseppe to further refine that so that you can find that right fit for you amongst 4,000 or so franchises that are available today. Is that right, Giuseppe?
Yep, that's absolutely right. Yeah.
So it's growing. Exactly. So that's to me, in my experience, the key to success there. And Giuseppe talks about it in the book, and I've followed this philosophy for a long time. I think there are 5 at a very high level critical components that you need to look at when you're evaluating a franchise. Of course, in this 1 hour, we're just going to touch on it at a high level, but that's part of what you see in the workshop worksheet at the very bottom. I'll explain what that means, and we'll use that there as a practice when we go through this. In fact, as we go through this, I want you to think of one or two things. Either you might be at a point where you've already got an idea for a franchise that you're interested in. And so if that's the case, keep that in mind as you are completing some of these things on this worksheet. If you're not, then maybe something that comes to mind, and then you'll use it again, and Giuseppe will guide you through a much more thorough process. This is just that first level of helping you determine and figure out what's going to be a fit for you. Then Giuseppe has a very well proven, this works, he does this with clients every day, a 4-step franchise freedom process. And so he's going to walk you through that at a high level. I'll summarize. We've got a special offer for you, so stay with us till the end. We're not going to hard sell you anything. This is just an opportunity for you to learn more, and it's all free. That's the good part. Then we will allocate, like I said, at the end, specific time for Q&A, but ask your questions as we're going through this. If there's something that doesn't make sense, ask it. I'll try to interject with the questions and answer all your questions, or at the end, we'll allow time for question and answer as well. So let's get into it. Giuseppe, I'll turn it back to you here, and then I'll be interjecting because I can't help myself. But let's start with level setting. What is a franchise?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? And it's not all burgers and French fries. It's not just McDonald's and food. So a franchise is essentially a proven business model. We don't call franchising essentially an industry. It's essentially a business model that's been proven. Franchises, as you mentioned earlier, there's probably over 4,000 franchises in the U.S. Today alone, and in every industry and in every investment level. So that's essentially what a franchise is. And when you buy a franchise, you're essentially not owning a piece of the McDonald's of the world. There's also porta potty franchises. If we can go to the next slide, just to give you a flavor of all the different types of franchise companies out there. But as you can see here, not just food, it's signs, it's haircuts. Some are service-based, some are brick and mortar. Some will cost over $1 million, and some will cost a fraction of that. So any industry, any type of business that you can think of, there's pretty much a franchise option for you.
Yeah. You know, one way it was explained to me early in my career about franchises to look at, because there's two components, right? Typically, Giuseppe, there's a franchise fee that you're going to pay up front for the right to become a member of the franchise, if you will, to own and operate your own location or unit of it. And then there's the ongoing royalty, right? Those are the two primary components typically.
Correct.
Yeah. One of the ways I heard it explained is that kind of the way to look at it, because I always struggled with, well, this royalty, what am I getting value for there? And we'll talk more about that. But the way it was explained to me once is that kind of the upfront franchise fee is kind of the down payment. And then the royalty fee is what you're paying over time for the right to leverage this business model that someone else has developed and perfected, right?
Absolutely. And that kind of goes into, the next slide, why franchising. And that's, when you look at a franchise, that, by the way, that franchise fee is only one time. You don't pay that fee ever again. And the royalties, and this is we can have a whole conversation just on royalties. Sometimes it'll include just the general support. Sometimes they'll bundle other services such as a call center or turnkey marketing. So royalties will vary, typically 4 or 5%, and they can go into double digits. But sometimes that's unloading an employee, or maybe you don't need a front desk receptionist because they have a call center that they've kind of taken care of for you, or they answer all the calls that get forwarded only to your salespeople. So yes, they vary depending on the companies, but that's absolutely right.
Yeah. And so using your worksheet now, first couple of questions. Number one is a bit rhetorical, but it's such an important point, because so many people that I talk to assume that franchises, like you said, are all about McDonald's or Subway. And certainly there are lots of options in the food industry, but just about every industry. And so what I tried to collect here on the screen was just that example, like you said. there are all types of industries where you can find a franchise. I would venture to say almost every industry,
Yep.
there is a franchise in that industry. So I want you to, number one, check whether it's true or false that all franchises are in the restaurant industry. So pretty simple one there. We'll start with the softball question. Obviously, that is false. So that's the big takeaway there. Okay. By the way, of all of these that are highlighted up there, the franchise that I'm a part of right now is this franchise right here called Office Evolutions. And I'm a minority partner with my cousin, who's the primary owner. And we have a location of that franchise in Plantation, Florida, which is a suburb of Fort Lauderdale. And then question number 2 on your worksheet, I want you to take a look at it just to further emphasize this point. Question number 2, check off all of the industries of that list that you think you can find a franchise in. So just take a moment and go through that list and check all of the ones. There's restaurant, automotive, home services, insurance, hospitality, home improvement, fitness, convenience stores, tax preparation, shared office, co-working, hint, that's the one I just highlighted, education. So you probably have figured it out already. All of those industries are highlighted here for that matter. And in all of those industries, you'll find great franchises. Some of them have been around for a long time. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, let's keep moving. So that was number 1 and number 2. Let's move on to why franchising, and we'll walk through this list.
Yeah. So before I get into the list, so why franchising? So one key takeaway from today is, when people say, is franchising better than a startup? And the answer to that is, the answer is no. It's based off of what you are specifically looking for. So the topic is going to be franchises today, but you have to appreciate it and really understand the value proposition of a franchise, which is essentially you're given a proven business model that's been tested, and you're going to be receiving ongoing support. So the question I always ask to everyone I work with is, do you want the business built for you, or do you want to build it on your own from scratch? And the answer as to which is better is completely up to you. That is something you need to figure out on your end. The cool part, which I tell everyone, is just because you start out with a franchise doesn't mean your next business can't be a startup. Maybe that's the jolt you need to get that Word document off the laptop and launch your startup, and vice versa. So one is not better than the other. It's for people that are looking for that proven system.
Yeah, and I'm a perfect example of that. My first business, as I said, was a franchise. It ended up being, that was the right choice because of everything that the franchisor gave us in the way of training, in the way of operations, in the way of sourcing. We'll talk about those things. And then if you would have asked me, Giuseppe, you and I talked about this when you were on my show, if you would have asked me 5 years ago if I would ever do a franchise again, I probably would have told you, no, I can do it now. I've got the experience. I'll build my own. I think everybody kind of falls on a spectrum from, I want complete, everybody telling me what to do and exactly because I don't know, to I want complete independence. And you have to be honest with yourself as to where you fall. But like you said, that moves throughout your entrepreneurial career. When I was helping my cousin and we picked Office Evolutions, I never thought I would have went through the franchise again, but there was so compelling the value proposition that I would not have been able to create on my own. So that's the other thing to remember. All right, we've covered this point about opportunities in all industries, but talk to me more about the step-by-step guidance and what that expectation realistically should be with most franchises.
Yes, step-by-step guidance. I get this question a lot. So typically, not in every franchise, but I would say of the 95+% of the franchise companies we work with, you do not need any experience in that particular business or industry. So for example, painting franchises or cleaning franchises, building maintenance franchises. I was part of that business years ago, had no experience, but the franchisor almost prefers that. They prefer to kind of train you from the very beginning, from A to Z, as they train all their franchisees. And it's truly step-by-step. This is the very beginnings. They treat everyone the same. Many people have never owned the business, so they really go back to the beginnings as far as setting up their books, their QuickBooks, or their accounting software. So truly getting everything covered from A to Z. Transitioning from a corporate career, you work a corporate career. A lot of people I work with are corporate executives looking to make that leap, or maybe even keep their job and have a franchise. So, when you work a corporate job, you have systems in place at that job. You have rules, you have, marketing's in place, sales is in place. So it's a really quick and easier transition for someone that's worked in that environment, because, everything has been figured out. You're just essentially just following the operations or policies, procedures manual, and they teach you every step of the way. And this is. I'm sorry. Did you want to say something?
No, I was just saying that what that leads to is that this is what is at the heart of, right, is finding this financial and time freedom. But please go ahead.
Yeah. So Dan Sullivan from Strategic Coach talks about 4 freedoms. I talk about it in my book, and obviously the book is Franchise Freedom. And there's financial time freedom. There's freedom to of working with the people that you like and prefer to work with. So financial and time were the top 2. That's what I, when people contact me, this is the thing they're looking for. I'm looking for financial and time freedom. And I go, well, what does that even mean? I used to say, that's great, but what does it truly mean? What is that going to do for you? And it means something different to everyone. But, time freedom, especially, we're all giving 24 hours in a day, but it's what we're doing with that time. We all have it, myself, Jeff Bezos, we still have the same 24 hours in a day, but what are we doing? Is it quality time? Which leads us to financial. Financial is great, but that shouldn't be the motivating drive. The motivating drive should just be overall time freedom. So now you have the money with the extra time you have to do the things you want. But if money is the only driver, I would question that and just say, okay, well, what else are you doing it for? Because owning a business is not easy. It's definitely, we talk about that in our meetings as to who's the right fit or not.
Yeah, great point. And I think that then leads then to where I want you all to give some thought to is, what is your motivation? What is your why? And Giuseppe will add his comments here in a moment, but this is so critical, and it plays off of what he was just talking about. What I want you to write down in number 3 here is just, even if it's just at a high level, but I challenge you to really do some work on this. And when you work with Giuseppe, he will challenge you as well. What is your vision for where you want to be in 5 or maybe even 10 years? And then the reason that's so important is, again, as Giuseppe said, you want to then make sure that the franchise that you're considering, or any business, is in alignment with that vision. Mm-hmm. I see so many people, Giuseppe, who will go about it, with a different motivation. Maybe it's just because, like you said, they heard, oh, the car wash business, you can make huge money, so they'll go that route. But is it going to get you on the path to where you want to be longer term is the key thing, right?
Absolutely. In anything you do, you want to have a vision as to where you want to be, and be very specific. Start out with that blank slate and figure out what the next 5 or 10 years looks like. And alignment is crucial. And we talk about that with just scheduling your week. But alignment, what does that actually mean? So when we talk about certain businesses where you want time freedom, so let's focus just on time freedom. Obviously, you want the business to make money, but time with your family. And I see so many people, including myself, so I'm guilty of this as well. I started looking at some of the large restaurant chains because I didn't just start franchising. It's been 15 years. So back then, you had big names like a Subway, and nothing against Subway or food, service type of franchises. But my vision, I kept changing, because now they told me with Subway, the hours would be, 7 days a week. I'd be working nights and weekends. And that wasn't in line with spending time with my family on the weekends and going to my kids' soccer games and ballet practice or dance recitals and things like that. So you want to make sure that when you pick a right franchise, it's for you, and not, you start changing your vision. You start changing, the alignment, and saying, okay, well, time is important, but yeah, I'll do 7 days a week. That's fine. And then the next thing comes up. Well, I don't want a lot of employees, but that franchise requires that. What the heck? I'll hire 50 employees. So you want to, there's plenty of options out there. So you really wanted to align with that vision and be specific. If 5 years you want to be in a different country, retired, working 5 hours a week, write that down. And that does affect the type of business that you should, that I would recommend exploring.
Agreed. So take a moment on question number 3. And again, this isn't real in depth yet. And maybe you've done a lot of work on this. Maybe you've not done any, but that's the key thing. I want to make sure that certainly as you start to work with Giuseppe or whoever you work with as a franchise consultant, that you've given this some thorough thought. Where do you want it to take you? So just write down a sentence or two right now in question number 3 as to why are you considering a franchise? All right, let's move on into the next section, the criteria, and start to talk about some of the things. This is at a very high level, Giuseppe, but let's start to talk about, and some of this we've touched on already, but we'll take it that next layer of detail. Let's talk about industry. You mentioned you don't have to have experience, which is absolutely true, but what are your thoughts? Do you think we should explore, at least initially, an industry where we do have some experience, or have you found that it really doesn't matter?
We take it into consideration. So I typically like to start at, and this will affect, kind of affect all of these, but we like to start out with a blank slate, but we want to find out your opportunities, right? Your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities. So if you are in a specific industry, maybe you have certain contacts or connections that you can leverage. For example, maybe it's in the insurance industry, and you are looking at a water and smoke mitigation franchise where you have the existing contacts, or maybe even your first few employees. So we definitely explore all options, but I would not lead in and say this was the most important.
Yeah, I think the other thing that happens, I knew for me, for example, back then, I was a computer programmer. The last thing I wanted was to start a business having anything to do with IT, right? And many of you listening, probably you might be at that point in your career where it's like, that's the last thing I want to do is anything I do in the corporate world now. So that is one of the reasons a franchise might be a fit, is you don't have to have experience in a particular industry.
Correct.
Yeah. All right, B2B versus B2C. B2B means business to business. And so there's a choice here. You don't have to make that choice right now, but we're just kind of putting this in front of you to think about this. But tell me in your experience and thoughts, Giuseppe, what are some of the things I need to think about that are different between business to business type franchises versus business to consumer type franchises?
Yeah. So one is not better than the other, but it's who do you want to work with, right? We talked about the freedom to work with the people that you enjoy, certain industries. So with B2B, we tend to see sales heavy franchises where you're going, business to business. Maybe it's helping them reduce their expenses. There's a franchise just on that. And there are other businesses where they offer small business coaching and things like that. So, but this requires an analytical person, but that can go out door to door and meet with business owners, versus the B2C. And the B2C, you're dealing directly with the consumer. And we see quite a bit of that in the home service space. And with that being said, tend to be a little bit higher of an investment, but the marketing tends to be turnkey and done for you. So directly marketing to that consumer, to that homeowner, but the marketing is essentially kind of turnkey and handling that for you.
Yeah. So, by the way, so now on your worksheet on item number 4, there were several questions here that we've gotten into already. Alignment with your vision or your why. You can leave that one unchecked right now. That's just a prompt for you to think about as you start evaluating franchises or any other business, to remind you to ask yourself that question continuously. The second one, industry expertise. Just think about it again. If you've got a franchise in mind or a couple of ideas in mind, then check that off that you've thought about that. Am I leveraging some expertise, or do I not want to do anything related to what I've been doing? But then the next one is, there's 2 check boxes there. So ask yourself right now, and again, you have the right to change your mind, right? But ask yourself right now. I know for me, for example, at where I'm at now, I prefer B2B. That's why I do things like coaching and consulting, because I can connect with another business owner a lot better. I do not love working with the public. I just don't like it. So you have to be honest with yourself. And as you're going through the evaluation, put yourself in a day in the life, if you will, and Giuseppe will help you with that. Especially once you narrow it down, you're going to go and observe, hopefully, if there's a location near you. Put yourself in those shoes and start to ask yourself, who am I? And be honest about that.
Very good point. And that's actually one of the most important things. If you take one thing away, is figuring out what you would like your ideal role to be. Mm-hmm. So if you are in the mosquito spraying business, that doesn't mean you're going to go out and spray mosquitoes.
Right.
But what is your role? And that is a networking role and things like that. So we could definitely talk more about that.
This is about size, right? So do I want to just have one location, or am I thinking I'm going to build something bigger? Because, for example, you mentioned Subway. Well, if you open just one location, ain't going to be much money in that, right? So that's where this comes into play. Now, you may not be able to answer this question right now, but what are your thoughts here, Giuseppe?
Single versus multi, there's a lot to this topic. So a single could be a single territory. Maybe it's a couple counties. It could be or a physical location. And then you have multi-unit. And the way I explain it is when you're in retail, the quick explanation is with the retail scalability, you're going to need staff at every location. So you're going to scale. There's no real, speeding things up, I should say, versus a service business where you're buying multiple territories. We had a family buy 3 territories in one of the states for a water and smoke mitigation franchise. And they were able to utilize one staff of 3 people to service all 3 territories until they hit capacity. So there's a lot of things to consider. When researching, you're also going to speak with franchisees and they'll tell you what they're truly making. So you'll get as far as an income. So you'll look at the franchise agreement. You'll also speak with franchisees because you may go in saying, I want to maybe initially buy 1, but you would need 3 based off your research to make the income that you're looking to make. So a lot of research involved there. It's a whole conversation that we put together. One way I kind of look at it is that multi-unit is almost like an insurance policy where you buy, for example, 2 locations or 3 territories for future expansion. Typically, it's 1 location or 1 territory per year. And what that does is it protects you so that no one else would buy that exact franchise in your area. So you have time to develop it, but you're protected so that you can expand within those 3 territories in 3 years. So
that's the case with our Office Evolutions franchise. We licensed, obviously paid for that 1 location, but then we have a reserve, if you will. We've paid ahead a discounted franchise fee. That's sometimes how they do it, to protect our adjacent territory. And we have X amount of time within which to develop that, or we surrender that. Correct. But that is something you want to start thinking about. And again, Giuseppe will help you with thinking that beyond that first step, because sometimes where you're at right now, you may not even know that that's even something you might want to consider. Virtual or online versus brick and mortar, I think this is a big one. By the way, before we go on to, so if you're following along on the worksheet, check one or the other on single unit or multi-unit, just based on what you're thinking now, okay? But Giuseppe, virtual versus brick and mortar, this is a big one.
Yeah, and a little secret when I work with my candidates, some are just torn between the 2. So sometimes we take a look at both. We may look at 2 virtual and 1 brick and mortar, and just to get a nice comparison of the various options out there. Brick and mortar is going to be a much higher investment. You're talking about $200,000 plus an investment, and it's preference, but I also make it a reality just to what to expect. So when you're looking at brick and mortar, it's going to be a larger investment, and you have to factor in you may not open for 6 to 12 months. So in making this investment, can you go 6 to 12 months without making an income? And now you may have a job, so obviously you keep that job, but you have to get permits. The franchisor has to approve the location. There's the build out. So it's definitely a slower process versus virtual, which is going to be more service based. Virtual, I kind of classify as you can work from home. Or you may need a small office or a very small warehouse space, maybe to hold inventory, and you're able to scale and have 1 location, if a location is needed, to cover a large 2, 3, 4 territories. So the service base will have a much lower investment. The brick and mortar will be higher. There's no correlation between brick as far as the returns you'll make on your money. I just want to be very clear. Just because you spent $200,000 versus $100,000 doesn't make a difference on your return. What makes a difference is finding a sustainable business that's a good match for you. And that's one of the most important things.
Yeah, great point. So, and so we've touched on there's really sometimes a hybrid model. I looked at a cleaning franchise, I don't know, about a year ago, and that's one where I had the option to start from home initially, and then when I did go to a physical location, it didn't have to be prime real estate. It could just be a small warehouse type facility, very much more affordable than a prime retail space. So there's all kinds of options in between, and that's what's important. But what I want you to do now is just think about, at this point, where are you leaning, and go back to how it ties to your vision. For me, for example, when I look at my vision, what I want is flexibility and freedom of location. That's top priority for me where I am in my life. My wife and I, it's just us. My daughter lives in Manhattan. We want to, as we go into this next chapter, have the flexibility to spend time up in the Northeast and travel. So as I look at businesses now, that's where it has to be in alignment for me. And that's another example of what I'm asking you to do as you think about this vision, where you want it to take you, and then helping you make some of these decisions as to what's a fit, not just today, but 5 years from now.
And one thing I want to add to that, the vision is yours. Don't let anyone interject, make changes, and don't make the vision about what you feel it should say. I had someone change their vision on me because they felt it should say a certain thing to almost, they felt it was going to make them more money. And I go, you have to be honest with yourself.
You do.
The money, everything else will come, the 4 freedoms we discussed earlier, but just be very honest and write the vision on your own without anyone else's opinions.
Agreed. And I get it. There's a tendency there sometimes because we don't know. So I get it. Sometimes we don't know the answer to these questions. What you're hopefully going to do as you go through this process, and as Giuseppe guides you, is you'll gain clarity. Okay. All right, this one, you talk about this one in the book, and I love that you use the term semi-absentee. I want to start with that point because in my experience, I've yet to find a business that's completely owner absent. Yeah. But talk to us about that. And different franchises have different requirements on this, right?
Correct. So depending on the franchise you're looking at, some will make it a requirement to be an owner operator. So they want you full-time in the business.
Full-time in the business, yeah.
And 40 hours a week. And semi-absentee, what does that mean? 10 to 20 hours a week. It's typically half. It's not absentee. We made sure to put in there semi-absentee. And with the reality is you're going to be putting in more hours in the very beginning, but once the business is up and running, if it's a location or if it's a service-based business, you have your staff and everyone set up, the hours are less. And semi-absentee comes with a little bit higher of a cost because you may have an additional employee, a general manager to take over your place. So you want to make sure they have a great program in there in the event that general manager does leave. You want to have that backup so that if you are running other businesses or have a full-time job, you want to make sure there's kind of a backup to that general manager. So depending on the franchise, these are questions that when you tell me and what your preferences are, and you say, well, you tell me, I want to keep my job and run a business on the side. We look for semi-absentee ownership. Can it be done? Absolutely. It is a lot of work in that first year, but it's built in a way that you don't have to be involved. And we have quite a few, not involved as much, I should say. And we have quite a few success stories. Agreed.
Yeah. I mean, I've done both, but I think the biggest misconception here, Giuseppe, I find is that people think that, and listen, I'm not saying they don't exist, that they can find a business, at least in the first couple of years, where they don't have to be involved.
Very difficult.
And in fact, what I've seen is those businesses don't perform very well.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with that.
All right, let's talk about, and by the way, so on your checklist, on your worksheet, rather, at this point, check where you're leaning, owner operated or semi-absentee. And again, one of those qualifiers might be that you intend to do this as a side hustle, as a popular term, or keeping your day job and doing this on the side. So that might dictate that answer. Let's talk about the types of employees, because every business may have different types of employees that you're going to have to lead, manage, hire, fire, that whole thing that comes with a lot of businesses.
Yeah, so types of employees is an important one, and types and number of employees as well.
Good
So
point. Yeah.
some businesses, they require 2 to 4 employees, and you can run your entire business with 4 employees. W-2 versus 1099. Are they contractors? Are you using them for certain services, or are they your full-time employees? With semi-absentee, you see a lot of people that want to. I hear the phrase "manage the manager." They want to manage a manager that maybe has a few employees underneath them. They don't want to have, just like a rest in the restaurant industry, 50 employees. Maybe they're making minimum wage and there's a lot of high turnover, which is what we see a lot. Maybe you're looking just for a manager with a few employees, minimal turnover. And these are career employees. These are employees that will grow within the business, maybe take over another location if it's brick and mortar. So these are things to think about with the type of employees.
Yeah, in office evolutions, going back to that example, we just have one employee. Yep. We call it the business center manager. And so that was a model that appealed to me and to my partner, Eddie, because we didn't want to have a bunch of employees to manage. Conversely, I just, by the way, last week sold our frozen yogurt business where we had a lot of hourly wage employees. And as you said, with most restaurants, there's a lot of turnover. That's just the nature of it. It's not for any other reason that, we employ really great young people, but they're in transitions in their lives, right? So it's not realistic that I'm going to hire a young person who's maybe in a local junior college or just out of high school and that they're going to stay with me for 10 years. That's not realistic. If they stay with me 1 year, that's a win. So am I okay with that? Am I okay with that challenge? Or like you said, do I want a career type employee that I can lead? It might be hard for you to answer this question right now because you haven't had that experience, but I just want you to, again, day in the life, think about that. Yep.
Yeah, that's a very good point. You don't need to answer today. Just think about it. Helps with the next conversation since you gave some thought. Location. Basically, where do you want your business to service? If you are planning on moving, if you have multiple homes, want to travel, things to consider. So the territory, if it's a brick and mortar location and you need to be visiting it, maybe you want it to be within an hour from where you live. So another thing to think about. Financials. This is another topic which we can have a whole show on.
I was going to say this one's loaded, right? We can talk about this for hours.
So sometimes this answers the question. So we'll talk about funding in a little bit, but with financials, sometimes people are looking at more of a brick and mortar type of business, but their budget maybe is more towards a service related type of business. So we talk about foundational franchises where maybe you start out with a small service business and then expand from there with additional brick and mortar locations in a different business. So getting your finances in order. What do you need on a monthly basis to cover your costs if you're going to be doing this full time and leaving your job? Lots of stuff to consider, but what are you comfortable investing at the end of the day?
So what I want you to write down right now on the worksheet is right now, what is that number all in, your total investment? Some of it you might borrow, some of it you might get from friends and families, but that total number that you're thinking right now. And then when you work with Giuseppe, he'll help you fine-tune that and help you ask and determine whether that's realistic. But I want you to write that down. Now, in my experience, Giuseppe, there are franchises that span the range from very low entry point and startup expenses to larger brick and mortar operations. There's a range of options, right?
Correct. And a good franchisor, it's called an item 7, and they'll give you kind of a range as to, depending where you live in the world, maybe the rents will be more expensive in one area versus the next, but they'll try to cover all expenses. So it's not just a franchise fee, but you're looking at marketing, your first 6 months for your employees, living expense. They bundle it all together to make sure you have a true picture and to set you up for success at the end of the day.
Hours, we've touched on it already, but just anything else we didn't talk about here? I mean, particularly what came to mind as you were talking about it earlier is this a type of business where it's open on the weekends, like a restaurant that's open not 24/7, but 7 days a week.
Right.
So we gotta think about that too, right?
Correct. When you're going to be involved in the business may be 24/7, but your involvement may only be 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. So.
Right, but you're going to get that call at midnight that something happens or somebody didn't show up on a Sunday and the place needs to be opened, right? Mm-hmm. So put yourself in those shoes. Am I okay with that? Yeah.
No
What
right or
about when
wrong
I,
answers.
what about when I'm at work, right? If I'm at work, do I have someone on
Right.
my team, or is my spouse going to contribute there? So think about that commitment that it takes to run a business, and then that helps you figure out which one is the best fit for you. Sales is another big one, Giuseppe. I want to get your thoughts here. Let me start with this. I believe that this is something that most small business owners that I work with struggle with. They'll say, "Oh, I'm not good at sales. I hate sales. I'm intimidated by sales." What I try to work with people on is that I get them to understand that as a business owner, you have to do some level of selling, but it's probably not the connotation that you have of the negative hard pressure salesperson. But let's talk about that and how that comes into deciding or helping to decide what type of franchise might be a better fit.
Right. I mean, with sales, you're, maybe not going door to door cold calling, but you're networking, chamber of commerce events and things like that, just getting into the community and talking about your product or service. So, and there's different levels. A lot of the brick and mortar, your customers are coming to you, right? We call them more of a, you have hunter gatherers or farmers, I should say, where you're putting the marketing out there and the customers coming to you. Whereas the B2B, when you're going to people's homes, it's a lot more salesy. You're going out there, you're bringing your mobile showroom, you're showing them what you have as far as a product or a service. So different ways of obtaining those customers, and you need to figure out which is going to be the best fit for you. But ultimately, yes, you are always selling your product
Yeah.
or service, but it may not be cold calling. It just may be a chamber or networking event.
Correct. But I mean, I've seen this mistake so many times, Giuseppe, and this is what you help people with, is they'll get into a business, as I say a lot of times, let's say maybe a mortgage brokerage business.
Right.
You got to go get that business. You have to go get it. You have to aggressively network. You got to put yourself out there. The business is not going to come to you, like you said. So that's what I want you to think about on this question. And I just want you to answer right now based on what you're thinking. If you're the type that either you have sales experience or you can do that, you can put yourself out there to go get it, or are you going to want to be more behind the scenes, if you will, and the business will come to you? So keep that in mind. All right, let's move on to the team, Giuseppe. I'm just going to put them up here for the essence of time, but talk to me about this essential team that you find is critical to arriving at selecting the right franchise. Right.
Yeah. So I won't spend too much time here, but this is just good to have in general. So franchise or not, I would suggest having this team in place. Starting out, I am a franchise consultant. By the way, my service is free, similar to a real estate agent. The franchise companies pay us, similar to when you go out and look at a house. The seller is paying the real estate agent, paying that fee. So I can put you in contact, or at least talk to you about the team you should have in place. And you don't have to. It could be the accountant, it could be financing, but having a great accountant, both personal and that can also handle your business, is crucial. In my case, my accountant, recommended me to my attorney. Attorney is also a very important person to have on the team. Setting up your legal entity, as an LLC or an S corp. I highly, highly recommend hiring a franchise attorney if you are looking at a franchise, as they are going to be a lot more familiar with franchise law and reviewing and setting the expectations on a franchise agreement. So I would recommend that, and we can make some referrals or recommendations there. And then a funding company. The funding company is actually a finance company, one of the first people we have you speak with. It's almost like when you're going to look for a home, you need to have a budget in mind. What am I approved for? What are my options? Most people I talk to, including myself, when I first started, did not know you can use a retirement plan to fund your franchise. So that funding company will give you all your options for free. There's only a fee if you decide to move forward, and they will get your accountant on the line as well to go into greater detail, in explaining how that process, what that process looks like. Excuse me.
Okay, a few quick points here, and then we'll keep moving. We're a little behind on time, so I'm going to speed it up a little bit. Again, if you have any questions, use the chat and ask the question there. We'll be sure to get to all your questions. One is start with the franchise consultant. As Giuseppe said, if you didn't know this already, there is no fee to him. He gets paid fee by the franchise that you end up selecting, if you end up selecting one. There's no binding agreement there in that regard. And then one last point: never ever sign a franchise agreement without it first being reviewed by your attorney. All right, let me break down these. So I'm going to walk through these fairly at a high level, and then I'm going to have Giuseppe kind of add some color as we go through it. These are 5 critical components. And so if you're following along on the worksheet, number 5, that's just there to kind of help you with that checklist of your team. And if you've got some of those people in place already, great, check those off. Otherwise, understand, start with the franchise consultant and then build out the team. And in that last box at the bottom of your worksheet, what I want you to do is I go through this. As I said at the outset, I want you to either think about a franchise you have in mind, even though that might not be who you end up going with, but just for the purposes of this exercise, because I think it'll help you really process it. Score the franchise that you have in mind as I go through these 5 components on a score of 1 to 5, 1 being weak and 5 being very strong. So as you go through this will help you to kind of understand how to use this then later when you do narrow it down, and Giuseppe will expand upon this, but at a high level, the takeaway here is, what are those 5 critical components to look at? A proven system is obvious, right? That's at the heart of what you're buying, as we explained at the outset as to what a franchise is. That has to be strong, has to be a strong, proven business model. It has to be, and Giuseppe will help you with evaluating that. Do they have the documentation, the manuals, the tools, the technology? In other words, am I going to have to go pick a POS system if we're talking about a restaurant or a retail, or do they help me with that selection, or they already have a technology bundle? Those things are important. Is that in place? The training is critical, so you have to evaluate that. What does the training look like? Is it a 1-hour Zoom session, or is it 5 days at their corporate location of intensive training? You have to look at that. This is at the heart of what you're buying. And then what is the ongoing support? Because that is what 5 years from now, when you're paying that royalty, is a big part of what you're paying that for. Do they continue to give me support? More than that, we'll talk about in a moment. Anything that you want to add here on proven systems, Giuseppe?
No, you covered it all. That was perfect.
Economies of scales is a big one. So, the best way, I'm just going to put all these bullet points up here. Oops, went up too far. When I first got the pizza franchise, if it had been Henry's Pizza and I were to go try to buy cheese, which, as you might imagine, was the number one and most expensive ingredient, I would have been paying a much higher price than what I was paying through this franchise system of 60 locations. And what the franchisor did is they bought cheese literally by the tonnage, stored it for us, and then distributed it to us. That was a much better price and a much more efficient system than me go to try to buy 10 boxes of cheese a week. So there was leverage there, economies of scale. Now, as you go through these 5, not every franchise is going to have all 5, and that's okay. That doesn't necessarily make it a bad franchise, right, Giuseppe?
Correct. There's a lot of under the radar type of companies you may not have heard of before, but they're well known in the industry. So yes, absolutely.
Brand is a big one. It may not matter. We'll go back to the example of Office Evolutions. We were the first location in all of South Florida. So the brand doesn't give me much value today, but now there's a second location that opened in Coral Springs. There's going to be the next one that we open. And so there's 2 in Tampa. There's 2 in Jacksonville. So pretty soon there will be a network, and that name will have more value. So I'm buying into that future value of the brand. If I go with the Subway, the brand is established. So high score there on that economy of scale and the value that it gives me. And then, of course, the credibility. Anything else on economies of scale?
No, you covered it all. That was it.
I mean, it also applies, Giuseppe, to if it's the type of business where I need equipment, a good franchise will facilitate that, maybe even at special prices, but it'll facilitate, where do I go get this specialized equipment, for example?
Right. Van and equipment packages, right? They're wrapped, ready to go, and everyone pays the same amount. So yes, absolutely. And they could be turnaround as quick.
That's right. Turnaround is quick.
Yeah.
And I don't have to go hunt that down where I have no experience on what to do. Marketing and advertising, another one. This relates to brand again, because the brand comes into play a couple of different ways. So ask yourself, is this a franchise that I'm buying into that has value nationally, locally, regionally? Again, the answer might be no right now, but it will in the future. And how important is that to you? There is a lot of value to plugging into a brand, because now you're marketing. Not only are you cooperating together, working together on advertisement, so you're pooling money together to be much more leveraged in that spend. And now you really start to get some of the multiplying effects of being part of a franchise system. Anything there that I missed?
No, that was cover everything. Some companies offer turnkey marketing with call centers, so everyone puts into that brand fund and it covers all the expenses. So absolutely.
Yeah. This is a big one that, I really didn't think about this until recently as I've matured my thinking about this. But the other thing that you're looking to and you're buying into is that research and development, that at corporate, at the franchisor level, they've got the resources and budget and dedication to focus on, where is this business going to go next? How do we pivot? How do we expand? What do we add to the menu or list of services? They're thinking about, good franchises thinking about these things so that you can primarily focus on operating your unit to the best of your capacity. Yep. So they're working on developing these ideas. Now, a good franchise takes input from its franchisees, but they then aggregate that knowledge and that group thinking and their expertise and their dedicated resources to figure out what's next.
Absolutely. The $5 footlong was developed by a Subway franchisee. So that was
as was the breakfast sandwich at McDonald's. That was developed by a franchisee as well. So a lot of those ideas come up. But then what happened there is that the franchise test kitchen tested it and said, okay, how do we roll this out so that you can plug it into your system, right?
Right.
And then this one is so key. This one was key, not to be repetitive with my Office Evolutions franchise, but that's the most recent one in my head. This was probably, Giuseppe, at the end of the day, the key reason that Eddie, my cousin, chose Office Evolutions is part of the process is always going to be, and Giuseppe will guide you through this, to talk to existing franchisees, because that's who you're going to lean on, learn from, share information with. I think it's so critical, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's a big part of the process. This is validation. You're going to, before even buying the franchise, you're going to be talking to existing franchisees. I call it, it's similar to a mastermind. Share ideas, meet hopefully once a year. And that's huge value in the system, since franchisees can get together, they can do promotions together, share ideas. So there's endless ideas that are always shared at these meetings.
All right, so these are at a high level. We've just scratched the surface of them, the 5 critical components. And so hopefully what you've ended up with here, if you were following along on the worksheet, is you've kind of scored, just as a practice, that one franchise that you might have had in mind. And I want you to use this going forward. And Giuseppe will expand on this and help you with this to help you evaluate franchises that you'll consider. But there's a process here. So Giuseppe, walk us through Giuseppe's 4-step franchise freedom process. This is proven, but walk us through this.
So full disclosure, I went through the same process 16, 17 years ago. So I know the process absolutely works. I'm a product of the process, I always like to say. So step number 1 is setting up an intro call. I call it a right fit call. And we explore, is business ownership a good fit? Is franchising a good fit? And do we mutually want to have that second phone call? And so it's, as I mentioned, no cost. There's never a cost, obligation, or contract. But we decide together if franchising is a good fit and if you would like to go to the next level. I learn a little bit about your goals, your vision, specifically why you want to get into business. Step number 2 is we send you out a questionnaire for you to fill out, and we do a deep dive to identify your goals. We do a consultation call, and we talk about all the characteristics, such as the industry. Do you prefer brick and mortar versus service? Again, touching on the motivations as to why you're buying this business. What are you looking to accomplish? And what does that 5 to 10 year plan look like? After that second phone call, I go to work and create a model for you. So that model can be used to figure out which are a few franchises. So that's step number 3 in the process. We use that model tailored just for you. It's typically a two-page Word document that itemizes out all the characteristics and what you're looking for in a business. And we explore 2 or 3 franchise companies that match that model, that match the characteristics and everything you're looking for. And after that, we make introductions to all those companies and continue to coach you throughout the process. So at the very bottom, it says, you'll never be alone. I'll be with you right at your side. I am always with you, answering any questions you have. So even after making, your intro calls with the franchise companies, we can take a step back and say, okay, how do you feel about this particular brand? Any questions or concerns? Did you ask the franchisor about this particular concern? So I coach you through the process and the questions. And this process, by the way, is similar to the process that you will go through with the franchise. They will also book that intro call, kind of doing a mutual interview and go through the process to learn a little bit more about you as well.
All right. We've talked about quite a few things here. Sorry that we're running a couple minutes behind schedule, but not too bad. If you have questions, I've put one thing in the chat right now, which is the link that you can use to schedule that call with Giuseppe. And so let's talk about that. What am I asking you to do now? You stayed with me all this time. You invested an hour of your time. I'm not asking you to part from any of your money. In fact, as we explained, Giuseppe's services as your consultant are free to you. But here's the offer for you to help you take that next step. The free book that you see the cover of here that we've been referring to that expands on all of these topics that we've touched on. Giuseppe's offering not just a free download of it, but he'll mail you a hard copy of it. I have a copy of it here, and I've been referring to it various times as I was preparing for this session. You've got yours as well. Great book. It's an easy read, so it's not a huge novel, but that, and then usually that call, Giuseppe, that you do is a 20-minute call, but you're offering a 1-hour call for that initial consultation, right?
Correct. We'll do a 1-hour call as well as the digital, as well as the hard copy of the book.
So to schedule that call, there's no charge for that. And again, there's no commitment. Even the next call, there's no charge for that. Okay. I can't emphasize that enough. There's a link in the chat window right now. And that's a tool that allow you to schedule yourself a call with Giuseppe. You got nothing to lose. You got everything to gain to schedule that call. All right. So talk to Giuseppe, and listen, Giuseppe is not a hard sale kind of guy. He has people that he's talked to 3 years ago that finally come around and they're ready. He's not going to force you into doing anything that you don't want to or aren't ready to do. That doesn't work. So don't be afraid to make that call. There's no high pressure there. It'll take what we've talked about here, and he'll help you now take it to that next level. And then I'm throwing in a free 1-hour coaching call. That's one of my free coaching sessions. You can use that at any time in the process. You might wait until later after you've already picked a franchise, or if you just want another opinion on franchises you might be considering, you might want to pick my brain on my experience with franchises. That's part of it as well. And so we're limiting that to the first 5 who schedule a call with Giuseppe, I don't know, here within the next few days. But the first 5 will get the copy of the book, the extended 1-hour call, and the 1-hour coaching session with me that you can use at any time. I encourage you to take advantage of that.